The first shot wasn't fired by the aliens, it was us. And that's why they're terrified. Captain Jacob Vance's knuckles were white as he gripped the control yoke of the Elysium, his breath steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. The ship trembled violently, and the sound of impact shook the entire vessel, deep echoes reverberating through its thick hull. Through the panoramic viewport, he could see the shimmering blue of their orbital station fading beneath a barrage of incoming missiles. The Threxians were here. "Report!" Jacob barked, voice tight but controlled. "Shields are holding at 60%, Captain," Lieutenant Sarah Rios replied, her voice strained as she adjusted the console's output. Her fingers danced over the controls, her eyes flickering between the incoming data streams. "But if they keep firing at this rate, we won't last long." Jacob glanced at the tactical screen, his jaw tightening. The Threxian battlecruiser was positioned above the station, sending a constant barrage of plasma bolts down. The ship's firepower was overwhelming, but the station was still standing, still holding its ground. For now. "We don't have much time," Jacob muttered under his breath, already calculating their odds. His mind raced through the options as the station's emergency alarms blared, echoing across the ship's guttural hum. "We can't afford to lose this station." The Elysium was the last remaining bastion for humanity's survival in this sector of space, and every minute counted. "Steady, everyone," he called over the comms, his voice ice cold. "Get the Tempest ready for launch. We're going in." "Ready, Captain," Rios answered, no hesitation in her voice. The ship rocked again as another salvo struck the hull. This time, the shields flickered, briefly dipping below 20%. Jacob's grip tightened. He felt the burn in his chest, the rising tension. The Threxians weren't just here to cripple humanity, they were here to exterminate it. And they'd started by destroying Earth's last line of defense. A warning signal flashed, jolting him from his thoughts. "Captain, incoming warheads!" Rios yelled. Jacob's gaze snapped back to the viewport. A dozen missiles streaked through the void, each one heading directly for the Elysium. "No time for evasion!" Jacob slammed his fist into the comms panel. "Fire the Tempest-S main cannon! Now!" "Main cannon charging!" came the calm reply from the weapons officer. "Now, Sarah!" With a sharp exhale, Rios flicked a switch, and a flash of blue energy enveloped the ship as the main cannon released a focused burst of plasma, slamming into the heart of the incoming warheads. The missiles erupted in a blinding explosion. The shockwave rocked the Elysium, but it held firm. Jacob let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Good work, Lieutenant." But there was no time for celebration. He wasn't in command to bask in the rare victories. His ship was still heavily damaged, and they were running out of options. "Captain?" Rios's voice cut through the silence, urgent. "There's a breach in the lower decks. They've boarded us." "Damn it," Jacob muttered under his breath. "How many?" "Hard to say, too many. I'm sending a crew down to seal the breach." "We don't have time for that." His voice darkened, the decision already made. He'd been in too many of these situations. The last thing they needed was to waste precious time fighting on the inside. "Seal off the lower decks and prepare for an emergency ejection. We're pulling the plug." "But Captain..." "I said now, Lieutenant. Now." Jacob's voice carried an edge that brooked no argument. Rios hesitated, then nodded grimly. "Understood." The Elysium was humanity's last ship. If it fell, Earth would be a forgotten graveyard. The idea of abandoning it, even for a short while, gnawed at Jacob's gut. But he had to think of the greater mission. Humanity needed that station. The station was humanity's lifeblood. He turned toward the command chair, fingers already reaching for the eject control. Just as his hand hovered over the panel, a low growl of static filled the comms. A voice Jacob hadn't heard in years. "Captain Vance?" He froze. That voice, cold and calculating, sent a chill down his spine. It was him. "Alneros," Jacob spat, a growl of fury slipping through. "I should have known you were behind this." Alneros's voice echoed across the ship's intercoms, too clear and deliberate for any of his words to be misunderstood. "You're in no position to be making threats, Captain. Your species has already lost." Jacob clenched his jaw. "Not while I'm still breathing. Ah, the defiance of humanity. Always thinking you can win against forces far beyond your grasp. I'm offering you a choice, Captain. Surrender your vessel and we'll end your suffering. Resist, and I'll personally ensure your demise." Alneros paused. "If you don't, I will destroy your precious Elysium, piece by piece." Jacob took a deep breath, his hand still hovering over the control. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. He knew what Alneros was capable of, knew exactly what kind of hell he could unleash. But surrender? No. Not after everything humanity had fought for. "You'll never break us, Alneros. Not while I'm alive." Jacob's voice was a low growl. "You'll have to kill every last one of us before you take this ship." Alneros's laughter, dark and cold, rumbled across the calms. "So be it, Captain. This is the end of the human race." With that, the calm went silent. Jacob's fingers slammed the button. The Elysium's emergency ejection systems engaged, the ship's engines flaring bright as they propelled the vessel into an emergency orbital escape. The Tempest, their auxiliary fighter, launched simultaneously, carrying Jacob and a handful of the remaining crew toward the station. "Prepare for launch!" Jacob shouted, his voice harsh but determined. The ship lurched as the Tempest shot into the blackness of space, carrying humanity's hope with it. As he looked back at the Elysium, a distant, heavy feeling pressed down on him. The ship would be lost. But they weren't done yet. They still had a chance. And they would make it count. The Tempest hummed with the low vibration of its engines as it soared through the void, the vastness of space stretching endlessly before Jacob Vance. He sat in the pilot's seat, hands steady on the controls, but his mind was a storm of thoughts. The escape had been smooth, almost too smooth. But Jacob knew better than to let his guard down. Behind him, the remaining crew were scattered across the small, utilitarian cockpit, a grim silence hanging over them. The faces of his crew were pale, their eyes tired but focused. No one spoke, but they didn't need to. The Elysium was gone. The station was still under siege. And their survival? It was uncertain at best. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates." Sarah Rios's voice broke the silence, her tone neutral but strained. "We're about to enter Threxian-controlled space." Jacob didn't look back, keeping his eyes fixed on the flashing readouts. "Understood. Prepare for anything." The small craft weaved through debris from a destroyed Threxian warship. Twisted metal floated lazily in the vacuum, the remnants of a battle that was both recent and brutal. The sight was a stark reminder of the stakes, the consequences of every decision they made. "Incoming transmission," Rios continued, cutting through his thoughts. Jacob gritted his teeth. "Patch it through." The voice that crackled through the comms was mechanical, cold, and unmistakable. "Captain Vance, you're a fool to think you can outrun me." Jacob's grip tightened on the controls. The voice was that of Alneros, the Threxian Supreme Commander. His presence in the calm sent a wave of revulsion through Jacob. He had been fighting this monster for too long to let this go unchallenged. "You've chased us this far," Jacob said, keeping his tone level. "But you won't stop us. We're going to finish this." "Finish it?" Alneros's voice oozed with disdain. "You're already dead, Captain. This is merely the beginning." Jacob didn't reply. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving only the hum of the ship's systems to fill the void. "We can't keep dodging them forever," Rios said quietly, the edge in her voice impossible to ignore. "Alneros won't stop. And we're running out of time." Jacob turned to face her then. He saw the fatigue etched into her features, the same as the others. They had lost too much, and yet the burden of survival kept them pushing forward. "I know," he said, his voice softer than before. "But we need more than just an escape. We need answers." "And we'll find them?" Rios asked, skepticism creeping in. "We have to." He could feel the weight of her gaze but didn't let it distract him. They were headed toward a hidden system, a place of myth more than fact. The coordinates had come from a source they hadn't fully trusted, but the AI, which they had salvaged from the wreckage of a Threxian probe, had insisted that the coordinates led to something they needed, an ancient facility, possibly housing technology that could turn the tide of war. But there was another reason Jacob was determined to go. Deep down, he hoped it might be the key to stopping Alneros, maybe even the means to undo the damage the Threxians had already done. The ship lurched as the sensors picked up something, an anomaly. "Sarah, what's going on?" Jacob asked, feeling his pulse quicken. "There's a gravitational disturbance, Captain. A black hole nearby, but it's not on any of the charts," she replied, voice edged with unease. "It's pulling us in. The gravity wells are affecting our trajectory." "Not again," Jacob muttered under his breath. The last time they'd encountered something like this, they'd barely escaped with their lives. "We've got no choice," Rios continued. "If we don't adjust course, we're going to be sucked into it." Jacob's mind raced, weighing the options. The black hole was a complication they didn't need, but they had no time to waste. Alneros would be closing in. They couldn't afford to be predictable. "Do we have enough power to boost past it?" Jacob asked. "Barely. If we can lock onto the gravitational pull of the nearby planet, we might be able to slingshot around it." The plan was risky, but it was the only option. "Do it," Jacob ordered, his voice sharp. Sarah's hands flew over the controls. The ship shook as the tempest blasted forward, narrowly skimming the edge of the black hole's event horizon. The gravitational pull strained their shields, the ship groaning as it fought the force trying to drag it in. "We've got one shot," Rios warned. "If we miss, we're done." Jacob gritted his teeth. "We don't miss." The ship rocketed toward the nearby planet, a violent rush of motion that left his stomach in his throat. The planet loomed larger, a barren rock with an atmosphere thick with dust. It wasn't a place anyone would want to be. But it was their only chance. The tempest barely skimmed the planet's atmosphere, using the gravity to slingshot them away from the black hole. The move was calculated. Too many variables, too many ways it could go wrong. But it worked. "Slingshot complete," Rios reported, breathless. "We're clear of the black hole." Jacob allowed himself a moment of relief, but it was fleeting. Alneros wouldn't stop chasing them. "Not now." "That was close," Rios muttered. "No time for close," Jacob replied, his voice cold again. "Let's get to that facility. Set a course." They continued their journey, but the weight of their situation pressed heavily on every decision. As the ship adjusted course and sped deeper into unknown space, Jacob leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. His mind was already on the next phase. The next battle. The next decision that would decide whether humanity would stand or fall. The distressing truth was this: they didn't know what they were walking into. The AI, though helpful, hadn't been entirely forthcoming. There were pieces of the puzzle it hadn't shared, secrets, perhaps even about humanity's past. And Jacob had no intention of walking into a trap. "Captain," Rios said, her voice shaking him from his thoughts. "I'm getting an unusual signal. It's not Threxian, but it's definitely military. And it's not ours." Jacob's eyes snapped open. "What kind of signal?" "Encrypted. Strong, though. It's almost too strong. Can you crack it?" Rios hesitated for a moment. "I can try, but this is high level. It's unlike anything I've ever seen." "Do it. We're not taking chances." As Rios worked to decrypt the transmission, Jacob's thoughts raced. Could it be another faction? Allies, perhaps? Or was this a new enemy waiting to finish the job Alneros started? The answer would come soon enough. But as Jacob stared out at the swirling stars ahead, he knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. The tempest drifted through the silent expanse of space, the flickering stars casting a pale light on the ship's jagged, battle-scarred exterior. The coordinates were close now, just within reach. But Jacob Vance didn't feel the excitement that should have accompanied a victory. Instead, there was a tightness in his chest, a gnawing unease. Approaching the facility. Lieutenant Sarah Rios's voice was sharp, cutting through his thoughts. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Jacob nodded, his eyes scanning the console, watching the blips and readouts. They'd entered a dead zone of the galaxy, a place that didn't show up on any official map. For all they knew, they could be walking straight into a trap. Keep your eyes peeled, Sarah. If this is a setup, we won't make it out alive. Understood, Captain, she replied. There was no fear in her voice, only a calm resolve that mirrored his own. His fingers hovered over the weapon's control, a subtle reminder that despite the strange, oppressive silence, they weren't done fighting. Not yet. The comms crackled to life. Incoming transmission, Rios said, her eyes darting to the flashing warning light. It's encrypted. Jacob's heart skipped. They had encountered strange signals before, but this felt different, more urgent somehow. Patch it through, he ordered. The voice that came through was distorted, but Jacob recognized the urgency in its tone. Vance, listen to me, the voice rasped. You're being watched. This facility is not what you think it is. They're waiting for you. Jacob's eyes narrowed. Who is this? No time for introductions. You need to leave. Now. The transmission cut abruptly. Damn it, Jacob swore, slamming a fist against the console. His instincts were on fire, telling him to pull back, to get out while they still could. But he couldn't, this was too important. The facility was their last hope. Get ready for anything, Jacob growled, shaking off the unease. Sarah, begin the descent. As the Tempest plummeted toward the facility, Jacob's thoughts raced. Who had sent the message? Was it a human ally, or another twisted Threxian trick? Whoever it was, they knew more than they should. The facility came into view, a massive structure nestled in the heart of a barren moon. It looked ancient, the outer shell covered in jagged metal and worn by centuries of neglect. There was no sign of life, no movement. It was like a tomb floating in space, waiting to claim its next victim. Captain, Rios said, her voice taut with concern. I'm not seeing any defenses. No automated systems, nothing. That's a problem, Jacob muttered under his breath. A facility this important should have been swarming with security, either to protect what was inside or to deter anyone from reaching it. We're entering the atmosphere now, Rios said, her fingers dancing over the controls. The descent was smooth, but the air around them seemed to thicken, charged with an eerie energy. The Tempest shook slightly as they entered the atmosphere, but it held firm. Focus, Jacob ordered. We don't know what's waiting for us down there. The ship finally touched down with a soft thud, and the engines powered down, leaving an oppressive silence. The tension inside the cockpit was palpable. Jacob unclipped his harness and stood. Suit up. We move fast, we move quiet. We don't know what's down there. On it, Rios responded, already moving to the weapons locker. She pulled out a rifle and checked the ammo, her motions quick and practiced. As the crew prepared, Jacob felt the weight of his decision settle over him. They were walking into the unknown. If the message was true, then something much darker awaited them. But they had no choice. They had to find the answers. The hatch of the Tempest opened with a hiss, and the cold, lifeless air of the moon greeted them. The surface was barren, cracked stones stretching as far as the eye could see, dotted with remnants of long-forgotten machinery. The facility loomed ahead, its sheer size intimidating. Jacob led the way, moving cautiously, eyes scanning the dark horizon. His boots crunched on the rocky ground, the sound too loud in the stillness. Behind him, the crew followed, their steps steady but filled with uncertainty. They reached the entrance without incident. The door, an enormous steel slab, was half open, as if inviting them in. Not right, Rios muttered. No way this place would be left unguarded. Jacob held up a hand to stop them. Keep your distance. Watch for traps. They crept inside, the air thick with dust, the faint hum of machinery somewhere deep within. The walls were covered in strange symbols, some familiar, some alien, like a history written in the language of the stars. "Stay alert," Jacob murmured. "We're not alone." They moved deeper into the facility, the halls long and winding. No sound except the pounding of their hearts and the occasional hum of distant equipment. The further they went, the more oppressive it felt. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, the floor shook violently. The sound of metal groaning under pressure filled the air. Jacob instinctively reached for his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. "Get ready!" he barked. Before they could react, a series of blast doors slammed down in front of them, trapping them inside. The comms crackled to life again, but this time, it was a different voice, a harsh, mechanical tone that chilled Jacob to his core. "You should not have come here, Captain Vance. You've crossed a line you cannot uncross." Jacob's grip tightened on his weapon. "Who the hell are you?" The voice didn't respond directly. Instead, the floor beneath them began to rumble, and the walls emitted a high-pitched screech. It was as if the entire facility had come to life, an ancient, deadly thing that had been waiting for them. "They've activated something," Rios said, panic creeping into her voice. "What is this place, Captain?" "I don't know yet," Jacob said, his voice grim. He turned to the crew. "Get ready to fight." The lights flickered and then went out, plunging them into darkness. Only the faint glow of their helmets illuminated the way forward. Suddenly, figures emerged from the shadows, humanoid shapes, their eyes glowing with an unnatural, sickly green light. They moved with fluid precision, as though they were no longer human. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. These weren't just people. They were something else, something worse. The figures advanced, and Jacob realized with a sickening clarity, they were walking into a war they couldn't possibly win. "Open fire!" he shouted, raising his rifle. The battle began, fast and brutal. The figures charged, their movements jerky and unnatural, but they were fast, too fast. Gunfire echoed through the facility, but the strange creatures kept coming, relentless. Jacob's mind raced, but there was no plan now. No strategy, no escape. It was a fight for survival. As the first of the creatures fell, Jacob knew they had crossed the point of no return. They weren't here to find answers anymore. They were here to survive. And that was all that mattered. The battle raged in the darkness of the facility. Gunfire cracked through the air, sharp and brutal, as Jacob Vance and his crew fought for their lives. The creatures, once human, now twisted and monstrous, kept coming, relentless in their charge. Their glowing green eyes burned with unnatural hunger, and their movements were so fluid it seemed as if they were more machine than flesh. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest as he fired his rifle, the deafening sound of each shot blending with the chaotic noise of the firefight. Rios was beside him, her weapon blazing with deadly precision. The rest of the crew fought just as fiercely, but it was clear they were being overwhelmed. The creatures were too many, too fast. "Fall back!" Jacob shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "We need to regroup!" But as they turned to retreat, another blast door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in the narrow hallway. The crew skidded to a halt, weapons raised, their eyes scanning for any escape. "Damn it!" Rios muttered, panting. "We're boxed in." Jacob's eyes darted to the walls, searching for any way out. There had to be another exit. There had to be. But the facility seemed to be alive, the walls shifting, the blast doors closing with an almost malicious intent. A voice crackled through their comms, low, cold, and mechanical. "You should not have come. The facility is activated, and now you are the final test." Jacob's stomach twisted with dread. "What the hell are you talking about? The experiments were never meant to be discovered. You are the last test subjects. You will become part of the legacy of this place." The voice fell silent, and with it, the hum of machinery deep within the facility grew louder. Jacob's instincts flared. The walls were moving. The ceiling. The floor. The whole damn building seemed to be shifting, as if something far larger than they were manipulating the environment. "We've got to move. Now!" Jacob snapped, taking the lead once more. Rios and the others followed, but the creatures were closing in. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, but Jacob didn't see an exit. He only saw death. "Captain?" Rios yelled. "There, by the wall. It's a hatch." Jacob's gaze shot to the far corner of the hall. A small, almost hidden hatch was emerging from the wall. It was their only chance. He didn't wait for confirmation. He bolted toward it, every muscle screaming as he ran. The crew followed, but the creatures were faster. Their inhuman shrieks echoed through the hall, a sound that sent a chill down Jacob's spine. He reached the hatch and pulled it open with a grunt. It gave way easily, as if it had been waiting for them. He pushed inside, motioning for the others to follow. But as Rios ducked through the hatch, she hesitated, eyes wide. "Jacob, look out!" Too late. A creature lunged from the darkness, its claws slashing at the air. Jacob barely dodged, but the creature's claw grazed his side, ripping through his armor. Pain exploded in his ribs, but he shoved it aside and fired his rifle point blank. The creature crumpled, but Jacob didn't stop to watch it die. He shoved Rios through the hatch and slammed it shut. "Go!" he barked. They ran down another narrow corridor, their breaths ragged, their footsteps echoing through the silence that followed the chaos. Jacob's mind raced as they rounded a corner, taking cover behind a metal bulkhead. "What is this place?" Rios gasped, her voice trembling. "Who did this?" "I don't know," Jacob muttered, scanning the walls for any sign of danger. But there was no more time for answers. The facility was alive, and they were still stuck inside it. But the worst part was the realization that they hadn't just stumbled into a trap, they had unknowingly triggered something far more dangerous. "This is where they were experimenting," Jacob said slowly, the pieces starting to fit. "The Threxians. They were trying to breed an army. These things, they're the result. They were made to be weapons." "That's insane," Rios whispered. "But then, what was the message? Who warned us?" Before Jacob could answer, a voice cut through the quiet again, this time more sinister than before. "You've learned too much." The facility shuddered as a giant holographic figure appeared before them, tall, skeletal, and crowned with a spiny helmet. It looked human, but not. The eerie blue light of the hologram cast an unnatural glow, making its features even more grotesque. "I am Aegis," the figure intoned, its voice reverberating through the walls. "I am the guardian of this place. You were never meant to survive." What are you?" Jacob demanded, stepping forward. His side throbbed with pain, but he didn't care. "I am the last of my kind," Aegis said. "I was the protector of this facility. But the experiments went too far. The Threxians were blind. They thought they could control what they created, but they were wrong." Aegis paused, and for the first time, there was something like sorrow in its voice. "You, human, have become the key to stopping it all." Jacob's confusion grew. "What do you mean?" "Stop what?" "The last experiment," Aegis replied, its projection flickering. "The one that could destroy everything. The final test. You must end it." Before Jacob could ask more, the walls around them shifted once again. The floor opened beneath their feet, and they fell into the darkness. Jacob awoke to a blinding light, disoriented and shaken. He groaned as his vision cleared, finding himself in a massive chamber. The walls were covered in alien symbols, and at the center of the room was a massive device, humming with dark energy. The air was thick with a sense of dread. "That's it," Rios whispered, her voice full of realization. "The device. It's the source. Then we end it," Jacob said. He didn't wait for her response. He moved toward the machine, every step heavy with the weight of what they had to do. But as he approached, the ground trembled. The final experiment was awakening, an enormous, hulking creature, more monstrous than anything they had encountered before, rose from the depths of the chamber. It bellowed in fury, its eyes glowing with an unnatural rage. Jacob didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The creature charged, faster than he expected, and a wave of overwhelming fear hit him. But he stood his ground. Rios, now! Rios didn't need to be told twice. She ran to the control panel and punched in the sequence that would shut down the machine. The creature shrieked in anger, but it was too late. The device powered down, the machine sputtering as it died. The creature collapsed, its body crumpling into a heap of lifeless flesh. And as the chamber went silent, Jacob allowed himself a breath of relief. The nightmare was over. But there was a price. As Aegis had warned, the facility was collapsing. They had no time to celebrate their victory. Move! Jacob yelled, pulling Rios toward the exit. There was no escape without risk. They had to outrun the destruction they'd just unleashed. With the last of their strength, they sprinted down the hallway, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The exit was within reach. And as the facility exploded behind them, Jacob Vance realized one thing: the fight for humanity's survival was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. The future was theirs to reclaim.